You're about to listen to Shed, conversations about race on Martha's Vineyard, with your host, Eric Adams, a presentation of MVY Radio.
When Max Kenner was a 20-year-old undergraduate student at Bard College, he created a program that provides college education for incarcerated people in New York. Max and two alumni of the program talked to us about the power that education has on people behind bars and the impact it has on the communities they come from. Hello again, folks, and welcome to Shed, conversations from Martha's Vineyard about race. In 2014, Lynn, Novick, and Ken Burns began working on the film College Behind Bars. The award-winning documentary was shot over the course of several years and followed the lives of inmates of the Eastern Correctional Facility in New York. In part 2 of the Bard Prison Initiative episode, we hear from two of these men about the profound impact of the film and how it challenges our notions of who we are incarcerating and how education can help to set them free. We should probably mention the film, College Behind Bars, by Lynn Novick. Daiwan, can you describe the impact and reach of the film in terms of narrative change and your work specific to criminal justice reform and education?
Yeah, so College Behind Bars has had a really profound impact, I think, on the public psyche in this country around issues of crime and punishment in education and redemption, and also move people around public policy, right? Mm-hmm. You know, this is a 4-part, 4-hour Lynn Novick, Sarah Botstein, Ken Burns documentary, like all of their other work that dives into an important aspect of American culture and society and history, right? And when they showed up at Eastern Correctional Facility to make this film, it wasn't a given that we were going to participate in it, mm-hmm. right? Because we see on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, month in and month out, how people like me, people like Sean are portrayed in the media, how we are demonized and stereotyped. And so we had to sit down with ourselves and have a conversation. And I was on a debate team at the time, and we debated whether or not we wanted to be in this film. And, you know, we looked at Lynn and Sarah and Ken's work and decided that, you know, if anyone was going to do this justice, it would be them. But also we wanted someone to tell a different type of story about who incarcerated people mm-hmm. are and what we were capable of. And so we started filming in 2014, and the film came out in 2019, and we did a national social impact campaign around it and several screenings on Capitol Hill. And in 2020, partly because this film was out in the world and was able just to educate and move so many people around this issue, we're able to restore Pell Grants, federal Pell Grants to incarcerated people for the purpose of college and prison. Mm-hmm. That lifted over a 20-year ban that had been put in place, as Max referenced, in the 1994 crime bill. Mm-hmm. But we didn't stop there, right? Last year in New York, on behalf of BPI, I led the campaign to restore state-level financial aid to incarcerated people, tuition assistance program funding, because in 1995, the state, following the horrible example of the federal government, made incarcerated people ineligible for state-level aid on top of being ineligible for federal level mm-hmm. aid, right? Because of those two bans, we went from having over 70 programs in New York to about 4, right? And BPI came in 1999 and really has built the landscape in New York back up to what it is today. But we couldn't have done that without College Behind Bars. When we did the polling early last year, we not only found that nearly 70% of voters supported college in prison, we had plurality support amongst 2020 GOP and Trump voters.
Wow.
Just to intervene there for a second, everything Daiwan just said is true, but mm-hmm. to emphasize his last point, when Daiwan led the campaign to restore state-level investment in New York, and we did that polling, the polling came back, had happy results for us, exactly how he just represented. But that was a shock.
To you.
Right. That was a shock. By then it was probably less of a shock, but for 20 or 25 years, this was understood to be work that was effective, moral, redemptive in every way, facing the individual, but also facing the institution, saved money, reduced crime, reduced recidivism, all these atomized things that added up something very good, but was politically radioactive. The assumption was, because the loudest voices in the room objected to the work, that people objected to the work. And when we actually got around to doing polling, we found out that Americans were more generous, more reasonable, and maybe more forgiving than we had understood.
To your point, Taiwan, I thought one of the most important things about the film is it really challenges the notions of who we are incarcerating. The images that I'm remembering of, black and brown men studying and speaking Chinese, learning calculus, mentoring each other was really powerful. What don't people understand about our incarcerated brothers and sisters?
I think the thing people appreciate the least is how deeply their assumptions, the stereotypes, the caricatures affect how they perceive people like me. I've met people who think I'm telling them a joke when I say I've spent 12 years in prison, right? Because they have an idea of me that is at odds with how they experience me, right? And so the film does a really, really good job of deconstructing that, right?
It really does.
You meet me as a student before you learn what I'm in prison for. You learn some things about my family, about my life, about the prison system. There is a broader context. On the nightly news, it is someone got stabbed, someone got murdered, right? We talk about people as robbers, as murderers, as drug users, as homeless, not as people. So, Lynn, Sarah, Ken were really, really intentional to introduce us to the world at the human level before we got to some of these really, really charged places in the story. And another thing that the film does extremely well and tackles head on, and I think that, this is really, really important for where we are in terms of justice movements nationally, is everyone you meet in that film, the people who you connect with, that inspire you, that give you hope, are incarcerated for what we would call a violent or serious crime, right? And that is at odds with sort of the narrative that the people we should be letting out of prison, or the people who are most deserving of college in prison, are low-level people who have committed low-level crimes or incarcerated for drug offenses, right? And so the film really does a masterful job of challenging its viewers.
Everyone in the film is serving time for the kind of conviction that Daiwan described. I thought he was going to go somewhere else. Everyone in that film that you meet is also now home out of prison. The public has an imagined idea of people in prison like they don't come back.
And we know they do.
And virtually everyone does.
I had the experience initially watching the first episode. I was just curious. Well, what are these guys in there for? I really wanted to know. It was important to me for some reason, But by the time they got around to talking about why you were in there, it really didn't matter much. It was inconsequential, And I would imagine that is probably one of the most powerful parts of the film. We see people for who they are and not for the crimes they committed.
Because you wanted to know if this was bullshit, if this was
Maybe,
a trick, right?
maybe.
I mean, Daiwan alluded to the debate team.
Yeah.
And, it happens in the movie, and we have a debate team, and it debates fancy universities and their, representatives from their debate teams. And 8 or 9 years ago, Daiwan was on the team that did it. We defeated our team, I didn't do anything, defeated Harvard's team. And it became literally a global media sensation. And it was in, I think, every language in the world that was represented in some way. Just prison beats Harvard. There was no real story. The journalists didn't have, Lynn's film didn't exist yet, et cetera. But we learned a lot, pointing to that polling that would happen a few years later, about what was politically radioactive. What did people object to about what we do, and what don't they? And implicit in the headline, prison beats or incarcerated students defeat Harvard, is the reality that these students, these guys in this case, were doing real work. And in the United States, we make the assumption that when something is free, or when we do go out of our way to do something for others, and it's perceived as some kind of handout or some kind of liberal something or other, that it isn't earned. Just because something is free doesn't mean it's cheap, doesn't mean it isn't earned. That's right. And in defeating Harvard, the celebration, even among people who would otherwise be considered our adversaries, it's said that this work is real. And that's what you experienced, and I think everyone experiences when they watch College Behind Bars.
Go ahead.
If you don't mind, there's a group of individuals or, viewers that I don't want to leave out of this conversation, and to come back to the film, those are other incarcerated people, right? Some of the most profound screenings we did, irrespective of those on Capitol Hill and, those that move the needle around sweeping policy change, have been inside of prisons for incarcerated people. And them seeing this film have allowed them to reimagine themselves and what they are capable of and what they can do, not only while they're in prison, but as they transition back into society and rebuild their lives, right? And so we didn't only make a film for the public as we think it, in the sense of people who are not incarcerated, but we made a film that considered the population of people who could be most moved by this story. And that has been incarcerated people across the country in facilities that lack educational or higher education programs, and in those where it exists. Because they go back to their colleges, they go back to their professors and say, hey, we want what is happening at Bard.
The film clearly challenges the audience to think more deeply about who you guys are. And I'm wondering if the BPI experience, Sean, challenged your notions about who you are.
I think it's just what we heard from Daiwan just now, right? It's us having the opportunity through this film to tell our own stories, to give our own narration about who we are. And it gave a sneak peek for you all, right, that have gotten all this other messaging about who a person is that's incarcerated. I just, thinking about what Daiwan just said, there's such a powerful dynamic around seeing someone go through that experience, like sitting on the outside of the program and watching it from afar, right? Because you believe the rhetoric too. You believe it after a time. It works on you every day, so you end up believing the same things, that you're not as valuable, or they not as valuable, they can't do this, or this is the expectation, this is how far you can go, etc. And to see me personally, my brothers achieving what they were able to achieve in the way they were able to achieve it together in those cohorts was such a moving thing for me. Like, it's really laid the foundation, right, for the work I do now, right? It's about ensuring that folks have opportunity, and it's about ensuring that when you have that opportunity, we can pay that forward to others and expanding those ecosystems of support. I've always been kind of confident in myself and what I can do. I've watched others who come through the program just blossom intellectually and be able to, the debate team is the debate team. Like, I love the debate team. I was on the debate team. That's like, the all-stars of the game. At least that's what I'm going to say. Someone might want to say that. I say that for myself. But the journey is special. The journey is special. The messaging is extremely important, not just for you all, once again, folks that haven't gone through the experience, but folks that are going through the experience, their families, and those neighborhoods where we come from. The work that extends from the prisons into the communities is that next step. And that's where I'm at today, from an alum to working on the outside with other alum to expand opportunities for them and creating, I think, in them the cascading opportunity from them to family, to neighborhood, to community. I feel like a lot of this is really obvious. I don't think this is some code or some mathematical kind of equation that only Diwan at this table can figure out because of his discipline. But it may be obvious and may be simple, but it's extremely powerful.
Max, you said at one point in the film, we must remember that not everyone thinks we're doing the morally correct thing. Why is that important to remember?
To us, that's important for a variety of reasons. It's important for us institutionally and for anyone in it's a small field, but it's a national field, anyone doing this work, to remember the precariousness of it. Diwan alluded to some of the history. There was college and prison in virtually every state and federal prison in the United States until 1994, and then there was virtually none. So this is a field that has experienced, an apocalypse. We went from being everywhere to being nowhere because of people's hatred. Full stop. So we shouldn't take anything that we do for granted. But, just talking about sort of what animates me personally in my politics, I would also say in that give and take, that push and pull of progress and reaction, that we're always going to be pushing forward and we're always going to be regressing. And that is part of how we do better. But forgetting that, thinking that progress is some kind of one-way street, hurts us more than it helps us, in my view. And if there's anything that distinguishes our students academically, or the thing that I think leads to their distinction academically, it's that they recognize in that classroom. When the professor comes to a BPI classroom, not sure what they're doing there, they always come back to do more because the students palpably recognize that there's something at stake there. There's something at stake because, as Diwan and Sean have said, it's maybe new or unfamiliar to individuals in their life. There's also something at stake because at any moment it can be taken away. So we live in a field, we work in an institution where everything is precarious. That should not paralyze us. That should empower us. And if we don't forget that, we can make us be better because of it.
Was there pressure there, knowing that at any point BPI could be taken away?
I mean, that pressure sort of always exists. And, I think people on the outside looking in, or maybe who think that this has become popular, as Max has said, this is popular once upon a time, right? We knew that if someone got an education in prison, they were not only the least likeliest to go back, but they had the most successful post-release life outcomes, right? And we eviscerated college and prison despite the data, despite the facts, right? And so when we're looking at a system that is geared towards investing in people's punishments rather than their future, right? There's no way you can't wake up every day with that reality, right? Some days they don't let your professor in, right? It might have been the shoes him or her was wearing. It is a constant challenge to be a student in that space. But because so much is at stake, not only for us in those classrooms and for us in our lives, but for the wider field, because we recognize at BPI that we have been setting the bar very high around not what college and prison could be, but what it should be.
Mm-hmm.
That this can go away at any moment. And as Max said, that pushes you to have to do better, right? To wake up every day and try harder. When your professor shows up on the drop of a dime and wants a 30-page paper, and his name is Craig Wilder, and you've never written a 15-page paper, you are stressed out, you are paralyzed, you are immobilized. But you get through it and rise to the occasion, because how many people in this world are going to be able to take a class with someone like Craig Wilder, right? Craig Wilder is an African-American professor who holds the chair of history at MIT and famously wrote the book Ebony and Ivory. He's basically like the Michael Jordan of professors. Our other professors would come in and say, like, you're taking a class with Craig Wilder? No, I'm not joking. The other professors would be like
Really?
fanboying, right? And you'd be like, no, Craig Wilder's cool. And they're like, do you not understand who he is? I remember having to walk out of the classroom and go to the library and cry the first time I sat in his class, because seeing a black man in such command of a classroom of American history, of the subject matter, was emotional. It was inspirational for me. It was special, right? And in this world, I think we all know that we have to protect special things. And so, no, we can't take it for granted.
The point was made in the film that there are two education systems, one for the haves and one for the have-nots. Do we not have a moral responsibility to provide a second chance at education for the have-nots if we've failed them the first time? Anybody?
We do. But I would, look, that's by our friend, it's a quote from our friend Wes Keynes, who's a terrifically distinguished alum of BARDs and BPIs. I don't entirely agree, or at least my point would be to say that in the United States, we fail to provide a meaningful education, and we fail to invest in a serious kind of education, even at this stage, for the haves. We have failed in our belief in education itself in the United States. So when we look at the success of these incarcerated students, it should be an inspiration, not just, as Daiwan said, to people who are incarcerated around the country or the world, but to everyone, that these ideas, these practices, these traditions still matter and are worth preserving.
You know, if you watch the film, one of the things that is too easy to miss is the joy of learning, right? It sort of goes by as a feeling, as a sensation, but if you pay attention, people are laughing in those classrooms. They are smiling in those classrooms. They are fully engaged. There's a real joy of learning, right? And that is at complete odds with my educational experience up until BPI, right? And so it is something important to note. And also, you know, when we come to this question of, like, you know, providing this education to incarcerated people being some type of moral imperative, we end up on a slippery slope. I should not have to land in prison in order to get a quality education. There's a whole population, a whole generation of mainly black and brown people who have been denied access to education, but readily put in handcuffs and cells. We live in a country where there are more prisons and jails than public colleges and universities. That is absurd. That is a crime. The system should be on trial. We live in a country where we spend more money imprisoning people than it would cost to make all of our colleges and universities tuition free. And so it's not only a question, and we don't need to segment it off, of, do we have a imperative to provide sort of this corrective action to this population of people, or to make up for these systemic and societal wrongs? But to Max's point, this is costing us all. We are in this together, right? And what this film shows and what this program demonstrates is that if we can get this right in a United States prison, we should be able to get it right in every public school, on every college campus in this country.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so to follow up on that, I'd like you to speak to this if you can. This came from facts that were in the film. 630,000 people are released from prison each year, and about half of those will return to prison. The recidivism rate, which is an important metric, is about 4% for BPI alumni compared to approximately 50% for the general population of incarcerated people. Every dollar spent on educating incarcerated people saves taxpayers approximately $5. The cost of keeping people in cages is approximately $60,000 per year, which is more than enough to pay for a year or multiple years of tuition. How or why do people argue with supporting these types of programs, and what role might race play in that position?
You know, when we look at what mass incarceration is in this country, it is nothing other than a monumental policy failure. Prisons are criminogenic. They make us less safe. There is nothing that we want from people who have transgressed society in some way that we are going to get from a prison. But we live in a country where prisons have become wildly popular, horrible solutions to problems that result from other policy failures. Mm-hmm. We're not going to solve poverty with prison. We're not going to solve bad public schools with prison. We're not going to even solve crime with prison. So when we step back from that and say, what are we doing, and do a racial analysis, right, or apply some critical race theory, we see that people, particularly people of color, have been targeted and criminalized and imprisoned in this country over the past 30, 40, 50 years in a manner that is unprecedented the world over. Mm-hmm. We are 5% of the global population. We hold 25% of the prison population. That is absurd. And this, we get into this dark space of what are prisons achieving, right? What are they succeeding at? We know who they're hurting, right? Who are they benefiting? Mm-hmm. Across New York State, the upstate communities in which they are built, where the only employers are prison and the Walmart. And the Walmart is the largest employer in the state. How we use prison to gerrymander electoral maps, literally taking brown and black people out of their communities and putting them in prisons in the middle of nowhere to create seats based upon artificial populations. Mm-hmm. The ways in which felony disenfranchisement works in this country. Right? If we look at places like Tennessee and Wyoming, 20% of the African-American voting population is felony disenfranchised. Mm-hmm.
But I want some people might argue that it really isn't a result of policy failure, that it really is a successful policy that's been developed for keeping people locked up without the chance of really learning meaningful skills that'll help them to stay out, of permanently disenfranchising people. That prison system is working perfectly for some folks.
Absolutely.
I would agree. I believe that it is an absolute success. I understand what it means in all actuality. It's a failing of our society. Mm-hmm. It is a policy that has been, I think, very successful for a few. The law and order candidates, the idea of that was born out of the civil rights era, right? The policies and practices that followed are from a moment in time where we as a society were coming to a place of understanding more fully the history of this country for Black and brown people, and trying in some ways to address equity, equality for many. And yet, at the same time, the Voting Rights Act and other acts passed in that time, you had these other, I think, this groundswell of backlash for change. And you end up down that road 60 years later, where we're just now getting back to a place of like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? The 94 crime bill was a bipartisan piece of legislation. Both houses agreed. The president agreed. Many in the community agreed. Never looking at the policies that created this atmosphere of crime and violence in the communities across the country, right? Is it racism? It's almost an obvious answer. I try to stay away from saying things are obvious, but I do. But it is, I think, a question that when you put the evidence up to it, it answers itself, right? Is it greed? Is it capitalism? Is it all these other isms that have played a role in deciding that a few will have opportunities while many do not? I think that's a question that can answer itself if you but just look at the evidence.
But can I just say that, I try to avoid framing prison or these systems as being successful in any way, right? There are some people being harmed by them. There are some people benefiting from them. But in terms of society, at the systemic level, and in terms of public policy, this is a huge failure. They are not making us safer. They are drains on all of our resources, giving people dead-end jobs where they prey on other people and abuse other people in failing farm communities all over the U.S. is not going to take us in society to a better place or moment, right? And so I just hesitate to say, like, this system is successful. I think we can say that, it's functioning as it was designed and doing a damn good job of it. But it is a monumental policy failure on every level. As Mumia Abdul-Jabbar would say, it is a black hole.
What do you think it would take for us to move on to a better system of how we deal with crime and punishment? We have lots of examples from other countries around the world that seem to be doing things a lot better than we do. What's it going to take for us to move forward?
I think in light of our work at BPI, the expansion of college and prison, I think that is important. But the ability of these programs and the ability of the film College Behind Bars to really change the public consciousness around mass incarceration and other issues in the criminal justice space is how we make progress, right? Kant defines progress as a change in consciousness. And so if we can continue to bring people to look at these systems in holistic and critical ways, to think about them differently, we can chart a different course. But foundational to that are people, right? Those are BPI students. Those are students of other college and prison programs. Those are formerly incarcerated people across the United States who we're now hearing from. The silence, or sort of the isolation that's been erected with bars and handcuffs and walls and gates, is being broken down. We have been in sort of a summer of radical movement. And I say radical not in a derogatory way, but in the really positive sense of decarcerating this country. And it has been for the better. Crime rates continue to fall. And so this is not the time for us to get complacent. This is the time for us to redouble our efforts and really try to end mass incarceration in this country.
Sean, can you add to that?
I think so. And I'll take it a little bit out of just the context of college and prison and simply say, I want to live in a society, and I want my children and my children's children to live in a society where we've come to a place where college and prison is no longer, I think, the necessary avenue where my children don't have to go to prison in the first place. I'll put it to you that way.
Okay.
I think that how we understand public safety today, the narrative is public safety, though there's all these other, I think, associations about why prisons exist, why the budgets for prisons and law enforcement is as large as they are. A lot of it is through the lens of, hey, this is public safety. Diwan spoke to this earlier. Prisons are not keeping people safe in the way that they are talked about. Investments in people and in community, I think, is what can keep us safe, can get us to the place that we are told that more prisons will, right? Creating those safe communities. We have spent billions, if not trillions, of dollars locking up our communities, locking up our fathers, our cousins, our sisters, our moms. They have only led to the degeneration of many of our neighborhoods and communities. And I think taking a really serious look at what public safety actually is and not just the rhetoric of public safety would, I think, take us a long way. We should be investing in people and investing in neighborhoods that have historically not had those investments to address this long-standing issue. We're not, I think, today in a place where this kind of high in the sky, we're going to have these huge difference of investments coming. And right now, one of the shining light or an example of what is possible, which is what BPI offers many folks in state prison in New York, is, I think, essential to continuing to tell the story about what's possible and for people when you give them opportunity and you create access through intellectual rigor and value.
For people at home that are listening, that want to be involved, want to help, what can they do?
We are shameless, and I'm shameless. They can watch College Behind Bars, as Diwan said, on Amazon Prime or at PBS, and we hope they do, and that is the best way to get an intimate sense of our community, our students, our alum, our work, our institution. But unfortunately, also, I'm a professional who always has his hat out, and we exist because of the generosity of others. Because people believe in what they do and support it with their pocketbooks. So if anyone listening to this is interested in making a contribution to BPI and supporting a scholarship so an incarcerated person can go to college next year or in the years to come, please give us a call, visit us at bpi.bar.edu. You can make a gift. You can reach out to us. We can start a conversation. Perhaps you could come visit. We'd love to start a conversation. So thank you for asking. And Eric, thank you for having us.
Great.
And I just want to emphasize Max's point and say that I'm not an exceptional person. I had an exceptional opportunity, and there are many other students sitting in prison who would benefit from that opportunity. And so please, look us up online, bpi.bard.edu, make a contribution, invest in someone's future, invest in someone's education, invest in making this society, this world, a better place.
Hard stop.
Hard stop.
Folks, that's another episode of Shed. We're glad you were able to be with us today. We hope we'll see you again. And if you like what you heard, we really hope you will check out College Behind Bars and support Bard Prison Initiative.
You've been listening to Shed, Conversations About Race on Martha's Vineyard, with your host, Eric Adams. A presentation of MVY Radio.